Marcus is standing at the corner of a busy intersection at 2 a.m, and he is absolutely certain he has solved something enormous. The traffic signals are speaking to him, not metaphorically. The sequence, red, amber, green, red, amber, green, is a code. He has known this for 11 days. He has been awake for most of them. He has filled 4 notebooks with the translation. His handwriting, once precise and architectural, now runs off the margins of the page in looping cascades, arrows pointing to circled numbers, strings of letters that almost look like words. He is not frightened. That is the thing that will later confuse the people who love him. He is radiant. He is standing on that corner at 2 a.m. in a city that has gone quiet around him, and he feels like the luckiest person alive. He has been chosen. The signal turns red. He writes it down. He has not eaten since yesterday. He does not notice. Somewhere across the city, his sister is awake in bed, reading a text message he sent her 3 hours ago. It is 412 words long. It begins, "I finally understand why we are here." Schizoaffective disorder occupies a contested and uncomfortable space in psychiatric classification. It is not schizophrenia. It is not bipolar disorder. It is not major depressive disorder with psychotic features. It is a condition in which all of these can be present simultaneously, not as comorbidities occurring alongside one another, but as a single interwoven illness whose symptoms are, by diagnostic definition, impossible to fully separate. The DSM-5 defines it by 2 requirements. First, there must be a continuous period of illness during which a major mood episode, either manic or depressive, occurs concurrently with the core psychotic symptoms of schizophrenia: hallucinations, delusions, disorganized thought or behavior. Second, those psychotic symptoms must persist for at least 2 weeks, even in the absence of a mood episode. That second criterion is what distinguishes schizoaffective disorder from a mood disorder with psychotic features. The psychosis is not merely a passenger riding alongside the mood state. It has its own independent residency in the mind. The condition affects approximately 0.3% of the population, rarer than schizophrenia, rarer still than bipolar disorder, and significantly more difficult to diagnose. It often takes years. In the interim, patients are frequently misdiagnosed with one or the other, treated for a condition they do not fully have, and left to wonder why the medications that help others only help them partway. There are 2 recognized subtypes: the bipolar type, in which manic episodes are a primary feature, and the depressive type, in which only depressive episodes occur. Marcus had the bipolar type. He had been living with it, unnamed and untreated, for the better part of 4 years before anyone arrived at that conclusion. Marcus grew up in a mid-sized Midwestern city, the second of 3 children in a family that his mother described with some accuracy as loud and loving in equal measure. He was not the child anyone worried about. His older brother was the one with the temper. His younger sister was the one who required extra attention in school. Marcus was the easy one. Curious, contained, a natural reader. He taught himself to identify bird species from a field guide at age 9 and kept a list in a spiral notebook that, by the time he was 12, contained over 80 entries. That detail, the notebooks, the lists, the systematic documentation, would follow him into adulthood as both a gift and eventually evidence of something going wrong. He studied architecture at a state university. He was good at it, not brilliant in the way that draws attention, but steady and thorough, the student whose models were always structurally sound, whose drawings were always clean. He graduated at 22, found work at a small firm, and settled into an apartment a few miles from his childhood home. He had a circle of friends he had kept since high school. He ran half marathons. He called his mother on Sundays. He was, by any external measure, doing fine. His friends would later struggle to remember warning signs from this period. They would mention in retrospect that he sometimes seemed restless in ways they couldn't name, that there were stretches where he would be the center of every conversation, and stretches where he seemed to have retreated somewhere internal. They had not thought of these as symptoms. They had thought of them as personality. That is the ordinary tragedy of a condition with a slow onset. The early signs look like a person. The first episode, in retrospect, was not the first episode. Marcus was 26 when he spent 3 weeks convinced that a colleague at his firm was systematically removing components from his project files overnight, changing dimensions by fractions of a millimeter, rotating plans by angles too slight to see without measurement. He printed every version of every file and compared them on the floor of his apartment. He found what he was looking for, or he believed he did. He confronted the colleague. He was asked to take some time off. He did. After several weeks, he returned, embarrassed, certain he had misread the situation. He told himself he had been stressed, overworked. He was probably right, or right enough that no one pursued it further. What came next was harder to explain away. At 28, over the course of a single spring, something in Marcus's interior weather shifted in a way that felt, at first, like a gift. He needed less sleep. Not in the way that stress interrupts sleep, but in the way that a body simply stops requiring it. He was awake at 4 a.m, not anxious, but energized, brimming with a sense of imminent purpose he could not name. He began running longer distances. He read 4 books in 3 weeks. He redesigned a project from scratch overnight, because, he said, he could suddenly see the shape it was supposed to be. His supervisor was impressed. His friends were energized by him. He was magnetic that spring, funny and quick and present in a way that felt, to everyone including Marcus, like the best version of himself. And then the signals started, not the traffic lights, that came later. First, it was the building numbers. He noticed, walking to work one morning, that the addresses on a single block followed a sequence that could not be coincidental. He wrote it down. He began noticing sequences everywhere, in license plates, in receipt totals, in the timestamps of emails. He told one friend about it, framing it lightly, almost as a joke. She laughed. He did not correct her impression that he was joking. By the time Marcus was standing at that intersection at 2 a.m, he had been in what his treatment team would later classify as a manic episode with psychotic features for approximately 3 weeks. The euphoria and the delusion were not sequential. They were simultaneous, each one amplifying the other. The grandiosity of the mania gave the delusion weight and credibility. The delusion gave the grandiosity a target. He had been chosen, and the proof was everywhere, and the proof was beautiful. He stopped going to work. He didn't experience this as a problem. The work was small compared to what he was doing. He spent his days moving through the city, documenting, cross-referencing, building what he described in his notebooks as a map of the underlying language. He called his sister multiple times a day. The calls were long and pressured, full of ideas that moved too fast to follow, each one connecting to another before the first was complete. She tried to engage, then she tried to redirect. Then she called their mother. His mother came to his apartment and found him awake at 9 p.m, surrounded by printed maps of the city's electrical grid, a wall covered in string and index cards, 3 empty energy drink cans on the floor. He was calm. He was articulate. He explained to her, in detailed and internally consistent terms, what he had found and why it mattered. She did not know what to do with someone who seemed so sure of something she could not follow. A week later, the mood shifted, not gradually, quickly enough that those around him experienced it as a different emergency. The energy drained out of him over the course of 48 hours. What remained was not rest. It was something heavier and colder, a despair so total that he described it later as the absence of the ability to imagine that anything had ever been otherwise. The delusions did not leave with the mania. They changed character. The signals were no longer a gift. They were a threat. He had decoded the language, and now the city knew it. This period, the psychotic depression, was when his sister finally called emergency services. He was admitted involuntarily. He did not resist. He later said he no longer had the energy to resist anything. What Marcus experienced at that intersection, the simultaneous certainty, the elevated mood, the perceptual distortion of ordinary stimuli into meaningful signals, reflects a neurobiological collision that researchers are still working to fully characterize. In schizoaffective disorder, the dopaminergic and serotonergic systems appear to be dysregulated in ways that differ meaningfully from either schizophrenia or bipolar disorder in isolation. The mesolimbic dopamine pathway, which governs the experience of salience, the sense that something is significant, that it matters, that it means something, is hyperactive during psychotic states. This is what produces delusions of reference. The traffic light is not just a traffic light. It is a message, because the brain is assigning enormous significance to ordinary stimuli. In manic states, this same pathway is overdriven by mood-linked processes, compounding the effect. Marcus was not misinterpreting reality in the way we might misread a word. His brain was generating the experience of meaning where the neural architecture for meaning should have been quiet. The depression that followed reflects a corresponding collapse, often associated with glutamate dysregulation and prefrontal underactivity, that does not simply reverse the psychosis but interacts with it. The delusions of grandeur that the mania supported become delusions of persecution under the weight of depressive neurochemistry. The same false belief system, reorganized around a different emotional pole. This is why treating schizoaffective disorder is pharmacologically complex. Antipsychotics are necessary to address the dopaminergic excess, but in the bipolar type, mood stabilizers must also be used, and the interactions between these medications and between the medication and the shifting mood states require continuous calibration. There is no single solution. There is management. And management is a long-term relationship between a patient and a clinical team, requiring patience from everyone involved. Marcus was hospitalized for 3 weeks. He was discharged with a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type, and a treatment plan involving an antipsychotic and a mood stabilizer, with weekly outpatient therapy and monthly psychiatry appointments. The first year was not a success story. The medications required adjustment. One caused weight gain significant enough that he stopped taking it, which led to a partial relapse. Not the full manic episode, but enough disorganized thinking that he missed 2 weeks of work and fell behind on his rent. He and his treatment team tried a different combination. It worked better. Imperfectly, but better. By the second year, Marcus had returned to work part-time. He did not return to the same firm. That relationship had been damaged beyond repair. But he found contract work through a colleague who knew his situation and was willing to structure his hours around his limitations. He still keeps notebooks, smaller ones now, and what he writes in them is different. Observations, yes, but ordinary ones. A bird he identified on his lunch break. A building detail he found interesting. His sister recognizes the handwriting as his. The delusions recede during periods of stability, though he describes a residual awareness of them, a memory of the certainty that still carries some emotional weight, even when he knows cognitively that the signals were not real. He told his therapist that the hardest part is not the episodes themselves, but the period after, when he has to rebuild a relationship with a world that felt, for a time, as though it had been specifically organized around him. Schizoaffective disorder asks a question that most of us never have to answer. What remains of a self when both reality and emotion become unreliable instruments? Marcus's experience, the elation, the certainty, the collapse, the slow return, is not an outlier. It is the expected course of a condition that affects hundreds of thousands of people who have never been named. What stays with me about cases like his is not the strangeness of the delusions, but the coherence of them. The mind, even in crisis, is trying to make meaning. It is doing what minds do. It is doing it with broken tools. And that, more than anything, is what makes this condition so profoundly human. If you like unsettling psychology, like and subscribe for a new diagnosis each week.